Hello, and welcome back to the Indie Project Developer Log Week 4. This is the 16th to the 20th. One of the ideas I had in my brainstorming is to move up a vertical tower, one of these skyscrapers, from floor to floor, but that's one of the ideas I put on the idea list. Um, so this week I was focusing on let's get a top-down engine enemy patrol working. So I had to dive into the top-down engine AI system and work with the demo scenes to figure out how these things work. Um, so I was able to um, set up an enemy controller and put down certain points for them to follow just around a little pro builder block, just around in a circle, 1, 2, 3, 4. And originally this mesh here was just a character mesh like this, but I was able to figure out how to swap out the mesh and actually interchange the actual animation controller to actually for the built-in system to actually trigger and play this animation, this walking animation. That so this is one of the assets I purchased. It's just a little robot, and so he just basically he moves around, and if you get too close with him, he'll actually transition to his attacking state and start shooting at you. That's kind of built in. That's not intended, but that's what happens with the system. Um, so so that was all working. That's a basic building block. I have a couple choices on where to go. Like I have a system, a cover system that I can implement modular and put like a around here so when the character goes to the system he'll automatically go into cover. That's one of the things I want to do. um, Also, what happens, the main core functionality, what happens when you're spotted, you know what happens when he sees you. Well, one of the things that I thought would be a good win is to set up the stealth. And when you hit a button, I bought a stealth shader. So one of the demo scenes, you can actually turn an object invisible. So I want to set up a button. So you hit a button and it turns on. It looks like he's invisible, and then it toggles through. So um, diving into the top-down engine input system to figure out how to add a custom button, input mapping, modifying the system to take out all the other default mappings and just put in just the basics. You have your, let's get a little closer here. You have um, your directional. Um, Here you have your button to run and also jump. Um, okay, and then adding the stealth button as well. So um, working with the VS Code, I was running into an issue, namespaces. What are namespaces? What are assemblies? Why isn't it locating this library? My original thought was I wanted to append the system rather than modifying it. This is from software development background. Like if you have to update a dependency underlying framework, it may overwrite your custom changes. You don't want that. Running into this namespace issue, I just, I just modify the original system as of now to keep it working. That's not a good idea. You get tech debt, but the process of building things, we do a lot of different character iterations. Same thing with scenes. Kind of like checkpointing in Git. After you hit a certain milestone, everything's stable. You checkpoint it in. So if something goes wrong later, you can revert back and to a state where it's stable. Also, going into the scenes, you say you start out with the first scene, And if everything's good, you make a copy, and then you modify that, and you just keep going, going, going. And if something goes wrong, something goes bad, then you revert back. Same thing with the player prefabs. When you're doing a lot of testing, you have to um, um, you have to do an iteration of the player each time, and if something goes wrong with your, if it's good, you save the asset and then you make a copy. So it's like a version for each asset. You're always having a previous state to go back to if something goes wrong. Um, so I eventually hooked up the new stealth button. So just to test, print out a log. Now diving into the stealth effect. Now here's the real what is I'm dealing with the shader system. Good thing I had URP set up because URP shaders work. The shader graph works in URP. Like diving into shaders, with VFX, visual programming with nodes. Um, I did some of this in a previous course with Blender, so it's kind of similar, the same thing, but it is, it's visual programming, and I'm not sure what all the nodes do and how they work. I could kind of stumble my way through and figure out um, what certain shaders do, and let's open this up here in the shader graph. See how complicated it is, and I basically figure out, okay, how do you make the stealth effect go from top to bottom? Um, Doing a lot of testing. Um, let's see what else. Transparent. Okay, so the main problem that I ran into was the stealth effect. Uh, it only worked out of the box. It only worked if the underlying character mesh was transparent. So that's not going to work. You don't want to have a transparent. You want to have it opaque. So you don't want to have them see through the whole time. How do you make it work with an opaque mesh? So I had to modify the stealth graph and a custom uh, alpha clip. So this is where you have to implement your own custom solution to make it work the way you want to. So I got it. It was a very, very difficult project. Really uh, difficult feature. It was a really challenge, but eventually I overcame it and got it working to where I could stealth from top to bottom, but it would be choppy. It would kind of go in stages, and that's where I remembered, the lerp, coroutine lerp, where it would be a smooth interpolation of movement, not just an instant update per frame of where the position is. So eventually I got something where you hit a button and like, oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. I'm so happy I figured it out. It's a big challenge. But the problem is I ran into an issue where this character is he's made up of multiple meshes, and you have to figure out, like, oh gosh, what's a they don't teach you any of this in the beginner courses. What's a skin mesh renderer? Like, oh, that's for deforming the mesh versus a regular mesh renderer, which is non-deforming and attached to the. So if you want to, like, a different object attached to the armature, you'd probably use a regular mesh, and that was happening with the helmet and the tail. These are different attached mesh, multi-meshes. You had to figure out, different materials. What do you do with a mesh that has multiple materials? How do I make the stealth effect not just work for the body, um, the body skin mesh, but also the attached meshes? That's the real trick. That's the real problem. So eventually, doing a lot of work, actually experimented with, like, combining, baking in the meshes, baking in the tail to the other guy had a backpack, baking it, and that worked as well. But the problem is when you want to have something like a gun, that's a whole different. There's a thing called IK. Um, it's not going to work with a baked mesh. It's not going to work. So, you know, so it's a real challenge. So I eventually overcame it by just tinkering around, really messing around, and it really came down to this node here, this position node. It was set to object, and whenever you added a shader to a different mesh object, it would calculate the from its point there. So they would all kind of go at different times, and it didn't look right. But when I set it to world, magically it calculated the position from the Y down, the transition from the top of the entire position all the way down perfectly. So I didn't have to use any baked meshes. That was, I could still use IK, and any attached meshes would now work properly um, with like a gun and IK. So it's just a matter of pure will and just keep working on the problem. If one solution doesn't work, then you try something else. You keep trying, and if you get really stuck, you're just hitting your head against the wall. Try working on a different problem and coming back to it. Try sleeping on it. But this was a really tough thing to do. Um, and it finally works, and that's a core feature of the game. So, um, that's that's where we ended this week. Um, I I swapped in the cat mesh. It used to be a guy with a gun, but I swapped in the cat mesh. Um, and there's other things for next week, but I won't talk about what I want to do in the future. I'll just discuss what I've done next week in the next video log. Okay, thanks. Goodbye.